Hi, this is Zena Harris.
And I'm Mark Rabin.
Welcome to the tie-in. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today, we're talking with Kerri Coombs. And what I love about Kerri, she is kind of a jack of all trades. She's done several different positions in the film and TV industry. And I'm curious to hear kind of her story, how she thinks about sustainability from kind of these different angles. I know we've kind of known her for a long time.
I've known her for a long time. And I actually came across her as an early adopter for the Crazy Eights. And she was very, very interested and very keen. She's one of the behind the scenes unsung heroes who likes to stay, in the back, but making everything happen in the front.
Right. And I feel like in film and TV, there are a lot of people like that doing amazing things, which is why we're doing this podcast in the first place, to bring those voices forward. But I feel like, she is definitely an unsung hero behind the scenes. And I think really she's got that early adopter quality to her. She has been looking, she's curious. She looks for things. She tries to see how she can fit new tech or new processes into her work. I feel like, do you get that sense?
Yeah, I think she just comes at it from so many different dimensions. And that's what's exciting about her work and the conversation that we're about to have. And she's just very thoughtful about and diligent in how she approaches the problems that she's solving.
Yeah, I love it. We hope you like it too, and we are excited to get into the conversation.
Let's do it.
We're here with Kerri, and so thank you for joining us for the podcast. This is kind of a fun experiment. We hope that by doing this, we can elevate the voices of the people working behind the scenes, doing some really cool stuff and innovating, and so that we can share these stories, because I feel personally that we need to be hearing more about this stuff, more about sustainability, more about innovation, more about whatever people are doing, so that we can move forward as an industry. So that's kind of why we're embarking on this project, to bring forth the voices and the cool stuff that's happening.
Thanks so much for having me. This is really exciting. First podcast.
There's a pent-up demand, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. I think so. We don't get to hear our own stories about this stuff.
It's true. There is a pent-up demand, to the extent that I just have been out in the world talking about these sorts of things, mostly in the area of energy transition off of fossil fuels, and kind of have been able to make a bit of a job out of it, because there's such an appetite to understand not just what technology is available, but how to use it.
Yeah. So exactly. I'm curious though, when did you start thinking about this? I mean, you've been in filmmaking for years. Did you always think about this, or so how did you get started on it?
I've been working in film since about 1999, with a little gap for a bunch of other jobs that I did I tried every other kind of job, and eventually returned to film because that's my real home. I got into the lighting department. I started as a grip. I got into the grip department, and then noticed that the lighting people weren't working as hard, especially in the exterior days. And I was getting into my 40s, and I was thinking, well, I just join the lighting department and kind of take it easy. But then I started rigging and lighting, and rigging involves laying out all of the cable that is going to be involved when the shooting crew comes to use diesel generators in order to power whatever it is that they're going to do. And that's not easy. Those are 80-pound coils, and you're just a big show. You might spend weeks or sometimes even months setting up microgrid using this technology, that at the end of the day, when the shooting crew comes and films they don't need all that power. So the waste is really obvious. It's really plain to see when you've got 20 generators and hundreds of crates of cable laid out to bring power all into a place where in the end they play maybe a couple big lights and then a bunch of LEDs. It kind of seems like the lighting technology has advanced a little bit and left the power technology behind somewhat. So we're using less energy to light these great big blockbuster things, and yet we're supplying the same amount of energy as we ever did. Seems like that to me. So what really got me down this path, though, was this cool little event that happens in Vancouver called Crazy Eights, where people try to just blast out a short film in a couple of days. And it's all a volunteer thing, but a lot of industry people will try new hats on using this as a place to sort of test it out. So that was the first thing that I did as a gaffer, was this little Crazy Eight called No Reservations. And it was a very cool Indigenous project. And this was where Mark busted out his 13K battery, donated that for the use of this. And I was the gaffer that used that 13K towable battery. And just in comparison to the work that I was used to with this like days of work, laying out cable, because the Jenny has to be parked, miles away, and permitting is always an issue, especially in a little residential area like the one we were living in. This thing was just parked right beside the garage in the driveway. We were shooting in the backyard, this sort of like rock and roll type of scene with a lot of like flashing kind of concert type lights. We also had house power for shooting inside the house. Like, this was not a huge production, but I could immediately see the potential of this technology and how much better it is in every way to have a battery parked right beside the set with no emissions and no noise, that gives you exactly the amount of power, exactly where you need it and exactly when you need it. So anyway, I went down to his little shop. We had a little chat about where there might be some ways that we could collaborate and work together. Over the years, I saw these, more of these being used by bigger productions and union productions, but there's still like a gap in people understanding sort of how to use them, because it's different. There's a different planning process. And then, like, fast forward a couple of years, I ended up just working for Portable Electric, building these things. Also, Mark set me loose to go talk about them to film people sometimes and how to use them. And then the pandemic happened and supply chains everywhere got disrupted, and we really kind of like reined in our manufacturing, and I found myself just sitting in the garden daydreaming about what to do with my spare time. So what I did with it is I created training tutorials, like guidance for filmmakers when we were gonna get back to work, how to use battery technology effectively, how to plan so you don't run out, that you like know how much power you're gonna need, and then try to lay in a supply that can cover that. Also, during that time, I kind of tested out my methodology on another short film that was called The Victim, where we shot an exterior night spooky kind of scene in the middle of Burnaby Park with no access to house power. And we did it with just volt stacks. I cleaned out Portable Electric. I took every unit they had, and it was just little 2Ks and 5Ks rather than a great big towable unit, but we just parked them everywhere we needed power and kept an eye on them overnight. At that point, there was an app where you could sort of like, some of them were attached to this app where you could remotely monitor their energy levels and swap them out or daisy chain them as they got low. And we got through that shoot just fine. It looks great. It looks, you can't tell we weren't running, creating a half a ton of carbon emissions to make that, which looks the same as a show that would have emitted significantly more carbon.
Kerri, I remember in that presentation we did at SPF many years ago, where there was a slide there that spoke about, maybe rethinking your lighting, maybe working towards a low lighting, sort of methodology. Can you speak a little bit about that and how that works with battery systems and for filmmakers as well?
There's a great DOP that I worked with on The Magicians, Ellie, whose last name escapes me at the moment. And he sort of had this saying that some DOPs are afraid of the dark. So they like take lights and they light every little thing. But Ellie had a really distinct look for that show that involved really embracing shadow, and it's a magical show. Like, most of it happens, at night, unless you're in some alternative universe. There was a lot of shadow, and it looked really great. And he's gone on to, like, bigger shows and bigger things. But there was actually two DPs on that show, and we sort of flipped back and forth. This is like season 3. Between those two, they'd each take an episode, and you go back and forth. So you sort of see the two different approaches, where the other DOP was like, oh, I see a little bit of shadow there, we better light it up. And they looked different. And I really personally think that Ellie's approach also looked better. But he was very prepared. He was very planned, very far ahead. He basically had every single shot that was going to be shot that day was already in the can in his mind, and it was just execution at that point. Whereas a lot of people will show up less prepared and more kind of like in the moment and kind of like, well, what'll we do? And if you're taking that approach, what'll we do? It seems to always be like, bring out more lights, bring out more lights, bring out more lights, right? Lack of planning. The other thing that I noticed is I gaffed 2 features that were independent Canadian features where they didn't have much of a budget. So we just didn't have a generator. So our approach to lighting on both of those shows, well, Kayak to Klemtu was like mostly outside during the day, so that was not really a problem. But the other one, Juggernaut, was a kind of like a dude story, competition over women and stuff, and that had a darker kind of energy to it from the get-go and a lot more night stuff. I'm not to burn any bridges, but the film wasn't very good. But the only thing that got really positive reviews about that film that I've ever encountered was the look, the lighting. And the lighting was very, it was called, moody and atmospheric. And there's a realism to it when you just embrace the darkness, embrace the shadows that exist in the real world, and don't try to light them away. And it also gives you, conveniently, a ton of options in terms of how you are going to generate the energy that you need for the microgrid to do your work. So on both of those shows, Juggernaut, I never had a generator at all. And then on the other one, on Kayak to Klemtu, there was one day where we needed those great big special effects fans to create a storm outside during the day. There was just no getting around it. But at that point, we could say, we're going to bring in a generator just for this, just one day, just for this one scene, just for this one part of the film, and then it's going back and we're never going to see it again.
I love how you've got all these different experiences, that's the thing. Like, it's never like exactly the same to plug and play, right? You've got to kind of plan it out, as you said, right?
Yeah.
So,
and communication is also really key, because in both of those shows where we did not have a generator, I realized right out of the gate, we're going to be working with people who are used to that kind of infinite supply of power. And whenever you need power, you need to just call somebody on the lighting department and they'll hook you up. So we had conversations as early as, pre-production meetings, like right from the beginning, where I made it super clear to every single department head that if they had, unusual power demands that couldn't be met by house power or by one of our little putt-putts that we had, because volt stacks at that point weren't available. They just didn't exist. Then they had to talk to me ahead of time. We had to make a plan, and people were good with that. Some people would like downsize their fixtures and downsize their expectations for energy consumption. They do things like bring in LED work lights instead of these 1,000 watt nip lights that we used to use all the time. I'm pretty sure that's standard now. People had to work with me, and especially when we did the shoot that was just all on battery, not only were people informed that they weren't going to necessarily have an infinite amount of energy for stuff, but they also had to tell me exactly what kind of consumption we were looking at from adding up all of their fixtures and appliances that they might want to use that day. And I put that all into a spreadsheet, so I was able to say, like, we need exactly this much stored power. And I was right within about 5%, but those conversations were really critical ahead of time. The communication piece, you can't skip it, because otherwise people will show up expecting to just plug into 400 amps of power that is mostly available.
How did you deal with circus and craft and everything on the back end?
Yeah, well, for those indie shows, the ones that didn't have a generator, we were just using like work trucks basically. There was some trailers. We had some cast trailers. Most of these were like independently powered RV type situations that we could supply a little bit extra with the smaller Honda putt-putts, which now could easily be a volt stack or two or three or a bunch. But the bigger shows for circus, it wasn't really possible in the time when I was doing this work because the bigger towable generators weren't available. But these days, there's not only large towable generators that can handle a circus, like the biggest draw there is the heat, really. People
And you're
want,
talking battery
yeah,
generator, battery power
yeah,
stations,
like, you know,
right?
you can get
Yeah.
a 200 kilowatt hour towable battery, like
Yeah.
100 in Vancouver, but Moxion is coming up promising 600 kilowatts, which is plenty for circus or for Dave's shooting without even changing anything else that we do, according to my analysis. On something like a series, something like, Deadpool is going to have different ideas of how much power they're going to need. So those towables will now power a circus without any issues, but they just need to have the sufficient storage capacity. And we're talking about like a circus that has multiple cast trailers and an AD trailer and, catering probably, and maybe even charging for a fleet of EVs and all of that kind of stuff. They just needed to be bigger, but they're getting bigger and they're getting better. And there's also the hybridization aspect of things that's coming out where you can have your great big battery bank that maybe doesn't need to be 600 kilowatt hours
Yeah.
if you're just running another generator, which could be diesel or it could be hydrogen or it could be something else entirely, just to charge the batteries as needed.
And also there's the cast trailers that are also now becoming solar, right? Solar and
Yeah.
Solar, more efficient, all of that.
yeah, and you
Yep.
can run AC during the daytime in any of the sunny latitudes, and basically have solar powered air conditioning. I
Right.
mean,
It's
the
true. Yeah.
yeah, heating is a bit trickier.
Mhm.
However, with good insulation, think about a trailer is just a tin can, right? I mean, we need to insulate it. We need to wrap it properly with, what kind of
Mhm.
like, passive house type wraps, but basically
Yeah.
insulating solar HVAC systems. And we're seeing that. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what Ecolux was doing.
The introduction of like independently powered solar trailers is huge. Taking that load off for climate control is the biggest thing. It's like in my analytics, my spreadsheets, I have like little drop down menu where you pick the season and that changes your overall energy picture by a huge amount. If you're in like spring and it's balmy, you're minimal, but if you're in winter and it's cold, you're really heavy. I would love to see every work truck that's sitting in circus, like the big 40s, the big ones, and every trailer be independent, have an independent like battery bank in the trailer rather than even needing an external thing. And then solar panels along the top. You can't always park in the sun, but like there's always a little bit of ambient light. And then there should always be like the option of recharging off of something else, something that's in your back pocket.
I feel like, I mean, you're an early adopter of this battery
Mm-hmm.
technology and trying to think about alternative ways to power production. Um, I'm curious because I know it comes up all the time. Um, Kind of the knee jerk reaction of like, oh, that's too expensive. We can't do it because we don't have extra budget. Can you tell me just, how you think about cost, how you incorporate it in? Do you need a separate line item or do you just incorporate it into your existing budget? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can. So I'm also producing now, which is a slightly different thing. So when I'm advising other productions, which is something that I do sometimes now of how to figure out the cost, you need to there in Vancouver, for example, there's permit discounts if you're using renewable energy that are the early adopters will benefit the most. These are reductions in fees that will be sort of not phased out over time, but the qualifications to achieve those reductions in fees are going to become more stringent as we move towards a zero emissions goal, which I think is, or zero generators goal, that the city is working towards. That's a big one, but also fuel is never really, if you just look at the cost of a diesel generator versus the cost of a great big towable battery, you're going to find that the diesel generator is cheaper, but that doesn't tell you anything about the $1,000 or more a week that you're going to spend in fuel. $2,000 in many cases, like depending on the load on the generator. Like you have your minimum amount of spending, even if you don't plug anything into it, just to have it running is still a couple $100s a day, right? I probably should check those numbers, but I don't have my spreadsheets open in front of me, or the DGC calculator, which is really awesome. There's some tools available that can help you figure out what your fuel spending is going to be. And one of the things that has been, I think, a bit of an issue in production is that there's no really clear part of our budget where we're accounting for fuel, in particular, especially fuel that's dedicated to generators specifically. And if people are going around with a fuel truck, like diesel fuel truck, they will be filling not only the generator, but all of the trucks on site. And sometimes the key grip's own personal vehicle, or like whatever else needs fuel on the show is going to be drawing from that same fuel source. So it's hard to get a real tally of what your fuel is costing you, but it is substantial, and there's more tools available now than there ever have been to figure out what exactly that is. Like running your generator, your 16 amp or 15 or 1600 amp generator during the day when the sun is shining and nothing is plugged into it and it's just there for Video Village or whatever it is minimal.
Recharging a cell phone.
Yeah, you're gonna still spend. Yeah, right. It's like running the car all day long in case somebody wants to listen to the radio. Like you wouldn't do that. It would cost a ton of money. Yeah. Well, I can't do that because my car is an EV. But
right, but on set or in different areas where a black car is waiting or someone's waiting for a pickup, they tend to run the car.
They do, yeah.
Tend to keep it warm or cool.
And it's not unreasonable because when you've got cast coming hot out of set into the cold air, and much of the time they're not dressed for whatever the weather is. It's a courtesy to make sure that the vehicle is a comfortable kind of temperature. But those vehicles, those cast shuttles, they should all be EVs. There's no reason that they shouldn't be. Like cast being driven around is minimal mileage during the day. There's and my car gets 350 kilometers. It's like, and it's used. It's like, it's not cutting edge. It's a used Chevy Bolt. There's no way I would use more than that driving cast around on a typical production day. And there's so much time where I could be recharging at a bigger battery or house power or another power source, or even a generator if one is running for circus or something, right? Idling is a big problem that we should phase out. It's not that they shouldn't be heating their vehicles while they're waiting. It's just that those vehicles should be EVs.
If you don't mind, to circle back on this cost thing, just because I am curious. So you are saying that you are using your existing budget, you're just breaking out fuel, like a kind of general fuel line item, if you will, into other things, kind of subcategorizing it into things that, maybe like power costs or different types of fuel that you want to use, or you're incorporating your power plan with the existing budget. You're not trying to like seek out additional funding or anything like that. It's all baked into what you've already got. Is that right?
Well,
I just want to make sure I understand.
For me, not exactly, but I'm as a producer, I make the budget. So there's no like, I've been given a budget and I'm working. That's the type of producer that I am. Okay. There are producers who are doing service productions where someone says like, you have this much money and you need to make this script and go to town. I'm not one of those. I'm pretty selective, so I make the budget. So, and when you're making a budget you're looking at your costs. Some costs are negotiable and some costs are just fixed. And people don't question really the cost of having, for example, sound gear that can capture high quality sound. It might be costly, but you might look for somebody who can do it a little cheaper, but you're going to like, when you start to cheap out on things, that reflects on the screen. It reflects on everything that you see and hear. You cheap out on costumes, they look dumpy. So there's certain things that there's going to be a minimal standard. It's going to cost at least this much to do it really well. So you pick all those things out first, right? Camera and sound. For me, I would just include energy. To do this right, I would need to make that one of my like sort of non-negotiable standards of production, where I'm going to have a clean energy scenario on this show to the maximum extent that I possibly can, and start that from there. And then you get into all your sort of negotiable costs. And when you find that I start with a fixed amount of money. So like the series that I did was like $1 million for these 5 half-hour episodes. That's all the money that we were ever going to get. What you would do if you're a service production is, again, you sort of look at the budget that you've been given. You have this amount of money, you have to make this. And if you need a little bit more to get a clean energy grid, even after factoring in all of the savings in fuel and all of the savings in permit fees, you just take it out of somewhere else. They're like something else that's overfunded. And the big secret in service productions is that they get the big, they get the deal, they get the budget, they spend the money, anything they have left over is profit for them, profit for their company. The producers just kind of keep it. As I understand it, again, this is not the style of film that I make, but you find on those productions, which are mostly indies in Vancouver, almost entirely indies, that they're just constantly penny pinching. And where they tend to get it is from the crew, like lower and lower rates and longer days. And often, if they can get away with it, no overtime. And where that money goes, it isn't into renewable energy. It's into like a new Audi every year or whatever, like a vacation home in Salt Spring Islands. So there's some issues with the business model. I have issues with the business model, and I've set out to be a different kind of producer. Although I do have this like really cool blue Chevy Bolt. I'm going to drive that thing into the ground.
Well, it's good to get paid in general, right? So you can get a car.
You gotta get paid, sure, but where you're finding your savings reflects what your values are as a producer. So if you're kind of going like, I can save money on crew because I'm getting all these marginalized people, that reflects your values, right? I have like minimal standards for crew. Like nobody's making less than commercial rates on my shows, and commercial rates are pretty good. And it's been a while, but when I was doing commercials years ago, it was like at least $500 a day. Whereas the indies that I was working on were kind of like, oh, maybe we can give you two, right? And that's a 12-hour day minimum and often longer. Anyway,
indies,
your people and your energy system should be really high priorities.
Absolutely. And indie productions are a great platform for innovation, for bringing in new technologies. But they're also, as you mentioned, cash strapped. How do we bridge that gap?
Yeah, well, I really would love to see the manufacturers and suppliers and rental houses that are bringing on board, renewable options, just take a hit at the start, just to change the culture, just to get things moving in the right direction, to get people used to using the things, and especially to make them available to productions that are where, indies are one of the places we like to go to try things out and make mistakes, because when Hollywood comes in here, they expect a certain way of doing things, and we don't want to necessarily go, we're going to experiment on your show, unless they're super progressive. It would be great if they just take a little bit of a hit. I'm ideologically motivated. I want to see this shift, because every generator we can get offline is saving at least a half a ton of carbon emissions every single day that we get it offline. Even if we get it offline for part of the day, we're still, it's all about the carbon for me. So whatever we need to do to minimize our footprint is what we need to do.
Sounds like it kind of takes, not to sound cheesy, but kind of takes a village, kind of takes like all the stakeholders involved in this whole ecosystem to kind of, give and take a little bit here. So this technology or, ideas or, sharing stories, whatever it is in this space can kind of permeate the filmmaking community and just advance it, help it advance, if you will. That sounds super high level and whatever, but I think it sounds like you are in your work kind of a model, a beacon. Each time you do this, you try something different. You've done a lot of different types of production. You've used power in lots of different ways. You've used lighting in different ways. It sounds like you're just really trying to iterate along the way to figure out the best model to produce in a sort of low carbon, if you will, low carbon way.
Yeah, kind of. A lot of that happens in my mind, because the last thing you want to do is show up with a plan, an innovative plan that's a great big change to how people are used to working, and have it fail. So when we tried this night shoot in Burnaby Park, as I mentioned earlier, I talked to every single department head and I say, what do you have that is going to use power? Everybody. I didn't leave anybody out. And that all went into a calculation, and like to the watt, I had an idea before we tried it that it was definitely gonna need all of the volt stacks that were in the entire rental fleet of portable electric for us to be able to do this. But these are just like, small portable, like people can lift these. It's not the big towable ones, right?
What was the
Um,
resistance? Was there any resistance to that? And what do you think's holding people back?
you know, I had a really that the writer director was very progressively minded, very sustainably oriented, and she was 100% on board. And she had built a team around her of producers who also have been innovators in sustainability, particularly in things like recycling and lowering waste from places like catering and stuff like that, who wanted to try it. So the biggest issue I had was persuading the director of photography, who had a vision that the night shoot, we'd bring in a lift, we'd have a 4K in the lift, and we'd just do what we always do, like just put a bunch of machines that use diesel in the woods, and then get a diesel generator to power these huge faraway lights that light up everything. During the survey where we were looking at where we were going to shoot, and he was describing how that was all going to go, and all of the producers were all around, I was able to say, like, or instead of that, we could try this, which is a different thing, which would give you this sort of similar look, but without needing any machines and without needing any diesel generators. So what I proposed there was a balloon that would be like a hybrid balloon instead of a lift, so you can get it to the same height. Might not have the same sort of luminosity because was not going to be a 4K. It was going to be 2K light. You can get LED versions of this now, which are even less consumption. So anyway, point is, we're going to park the volt stack at the base of where this balloon goes. And then that balloon is going to be what's going to light us instead of this lift. And it was still tight. We needed to daisy chain this 5K. It didn't last us for the whole night. Having that conversation right in front of the producers, right on the survey, and being able to say, like, we could do this, and then we don't need a rigging crew to come in beforehand. We don't need to hire a generator. We don't need to rent all that cable. The volt stack just parks right here. And the producer was like, no cable. Let's do it that way. No rigging crew. No, like, there's concerns, and they're reasonable, that this concept kind of will cost jobs, but it's not exactly a one-to-one type of thing. You're like, there new jobs are being created all the time, especially with things like data networking and remote control of things. There's more and more like boards coming on that remotely control all of these lights, where there used to be people standing there twiddling the knobs manually. There's the job of understanding how all of that stuff works is also a job, and those are new jobs. So for every job that we're losing that has to do with running cable hundreds and hundreds of feet from over there to over here, hopefully we'll create a new job that isn't quite so brutal.
Yeah.
I love rigging, but I mean, it wrecks your body. It hurts.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is all an evolution, right? I mean, like how we live, the cars we drive, like everything just is getting better and better, or easier, more functional. So this kind of thing obviously would happen on set as well.
Mm. Yeah, it's one of those weird things where like efficiency is a great way to get us leisure time, but if we're not being adequately paid to do anything with our leisure time, we're like, I'm 100% on board with innovations that reduce our labor, but I'm like 100% off board with losing our ability to survive because of those innovations. So there has to be something else systemic to address this, because this isn't just an issue in film where we used to employ like, hundreds of carpenters building these phenomenal sets that can now just be replicated by a CGI animator live on a huge LED screen wraparound studio. Like there's a huge amount of positions that used to be just standard on the bigger productions will soon cease to exist. But at the same time, we have more of an appetite for content than ever before. So maybe we're doing more shows, and the same amount of people are working. The shows are, I don't know, something needs to happen at a systemic level that addresses these issues in every industry across the board, so that people are still able to afford the basic necessities of life, or acquire, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a transactional thing, while things like AI have a greater and greater take on a greater and greater share of the work that people used to do. And we've seen this already in the invention of the printing press, put all the calligraphers out of business, right? And the invention of the cotton gin put all the weavers out of business. And it's a cost that we pay, and a society that doesn't let people just fall through the cracks and go hungry and be homeless is the only society that really even deserves to embrace innovations like this, in my view.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say all that to someone who's worried about jobs in the film industry. What I'm going to say is, maybe, it's not such a direct thing. Like, you could be reskilling. We need to reskill workers so that they can embrace these technologies and come out strong as experts in the use of them and the application of them.
Yeah, kind of future thinking, right? Future, like, what's next? How do we upskill to get there? I mean, it will evolve, whether we're like, ready for it or not. Tech is like, God, there's some really cool stuff out there. And it almost seems like, if you don't look to the future, don't look at what that next course you could take, or thing you could learn is, if you don't have that mindset, you really are going to get left behind, I feel. And because you can't like stop inertia of like the world, right? Like of everything, business, right? And innovation. And it just seems like that's just, we as people kind of adapt as and some are just faster at that than others, but eventually we all have smartphones, like we've all moved there. So
I was a laggard with smartphones. I was reasonably concerned that if I got one of those things, I'd just be staring at it all day long. And I was right.
Yeah.
But I have them now.
yeah. Well, just curious, like, speaking in this way and kind of future thinking and whatnot, like, what is, like, if you were going to rewrite the playbook for production, what is like, one or two, like maybe central guiding principles? Like, it could be, totally something we haven't thought of before, but like, what are a couple like really cool, like, things you would want to see or you would want to live by in this work?
That is an awesome question. I'm so glad you asked, because this is really what I'm trying to do as a producer. So I'm like, really centering the story here. So I'm not just a producer. I do some storytelling consultancy work with innovators in all kinds of different industries. And a lot of it is just like, how do you tell your story in a way that gets people excited about the change that you're bringing to the table? So a lot of my clients in film are, BIPOC people or people working in sustainability. To me, energy transition is just one piece of the whole puzzle of major systemic change. So I take stories that will inspire people to look in other directions and be a little more compassionate and maybe a little more creative in their sense of problem solving. And then to that, I bring, lighting technology that is low consumption and renewable energy options. And also I really embed compassion for people within the building of the crew, the building of the team. Like, there's no assholes on my sets, and it's an 8-hour shooting day. But it's a hard 8-hour shooting day. I won't take a project if they say, no, we're going to do 12s, because that's what people do. No, I did a 1-day shoot for a documentary, and I was able to send the sound guy home in time to tuck his toddler in. And I just felt like a superhero. Like, when I said, okay, we're pulling the plug, it's been 8 hours, there were jaws on the floor. Like, nobody believed that was actually going to happen, even though I said it was going to happen ahead of time. Yeah. there's a lot that I would like to see changed. And that film that I just mentioned was called Safe Sets. Dying to Work in the Film Industry addresses many of them. It's basically that film says everything I ever wanted to say about what's wrong with the film industry, except for the piece about renewable energy, which I go out and say that myself all the time, everywhere I go.
Totally. Totally. I am super inspired by this conversation,
Yeah.
Kerri, and I just like I'm so excited to like share it with people because I think you know you've got a lot to say and you've done a lot and
Mm-hmm.
you're trying a lot and you're thinking about the people and I mean it's just so I'm gosh, I just love hearing this stuff. So thank you
Aw,
for
Yeah.
you're making
sharing.
me feel emotional. It all really does come from like a love of the people and all, not just the human people, like all of the people that are under pressure from the way that our systems now are not serving us anymore. We're like shackled in many ways, uh, in that resist the kind of changes that we need in order to have an enduring, sustainable, circular economy. You know, all of this stuff, and we're
Yeah.
like, there's so much pushback, but
Yeah.
yeah, it is all about the people. We need to keep our eyes on that.
And
Totally.
and speaking about that, what advice would you give young filmmakers coming into this so that they're not just showing up and getting swept up in how it's been done? You know, how can a young filmmaker, you know, approach their beginning of the career, but also take a stand and make what do what's right, do it, you know, what they're passionate about.
That's another great question. And I have to admit, like, I love seeing all the ways that Gen Z is changing the workplace by having some standards of how they're expecting to be treated, and how much they're expected to work. Like there's a lot that they're like, I don't even know. I want to take advice from them, right? I follow a bunch of Gen Z kind of organizing groups and advocacy groups that are specifically centered on work. My advice to young workers coming into the industry is to connect with others at your same level, leaders at your same level, and get organized, and fight together as a unit to see the improvements that you want to see, as opposed to fighting alone. And you know that it doesn't always have to start as a fight. Like there's different ways to fight, right? I basically, as a shop steward, as a gaffer, I pretty much always got what I wanted because I never went to a producer with a problem that I didn't also have a solution,
Mm-hmm.
and like and of course a clear-eyed assessment of the risk. So for example, if they want to cut your crew down and everybody's going to work twice as hard, you can go to, and that happens all the time, right? They're like, oh, we're losing money left, right, and center. We didn't plan this properly. So you guys, the grips, are going to have two less people when you definitely need those two extra people, or everybody else is going to be working twice as hard. You can go to your producer if you're a department head, or go to your department head and, you know, pick a new department head maybe. Move on to another crew with a department head who has a backbone, because that person should be fighting for you. That person should be going to the producer and saying, this is a liability. That's a magic word, right? You're gonna cut the crew down to such an extent that we're not able to safely conduct the work that's expected for the day, and or we're not going to be able to do it in a timely fashion. So you're not going to make your day, right? If you cut your crew too small and you don't cut your expectations down accordingly, you end up with people running around until they get injured. And I don't want to name anybody, but I know department heads who get their work that way by understaffing everything so that they can come in, you know, they will just acquiesce to whatever production says that they need to do. And that one person that I'm thinking of but won't name, every single person in under 40 on his crew has been injured in a significant way that put them on their back for days, right? So
Jeez.
anyway, if that's you, if you're on that crew, leave that crew and find a new crew, because loyalty gets you a broken back, right? And sometimes
Oh,
loyalty
yeah.
is,
Very
but you
Trumpian.
find somebody who's worth your loyalty, and just, you know, I don't know what to say. Like, it's really tough times for young people these days.
Yeah. But that's a good point. Find someone who's worth your loyalty because, you
Yeah,
know, what you want is worth it. So
yeah.
anyway, yeah,
You
that's
may find you like if you're if you're on a particular kind of track and you're a particular kind of person and you're ambitious in this industry, it's really easy to find yourself as a department head early on in your career, very, very early on, and just making that's what you do. And when you are a department head, you got to be willing to fight for your crew, be willing to fight for how you want things to be done, but don't let them know that it's a fight. Just tell them what the plan is. And if they said, oh no, we can't have that plan, you need to be able to tell them why. And that why has to include the word liability.
Awesome.
Well,
Kerri, this has been great. So many things to explore. And we didn't even touch on the actual hard technology part. On that note, just rapid fire, what are some of the technologies that are exciting you right now that you're seeing out there?
Yeah, the biggest one for sure is hybridization. So hydrogen hybridization in particular is a huge game changer. So you can have battery banks that don't necessarily have to be enormous. You don't have to have all the battery to last all your whole day. You can have one of those 100 kilowatt hour units, which is like smaller, less of a footprint, easier to get hold of, easier to manufacture, and then charge that off of a hydrogen generator that only runs to charge the batteries. But you can also do that with diesel or any other kind of power supply. And overall, it is substantially more efficient. And Mark, you know exactly how much more efficient because you've done this with the diesel hybrid situation.
Yeah.
That is super exciting in terms of energy transition. I am loving how quickly LED lights have just become the standard, because an LED light uses about 7% to 10% of the energy that is required by HMI or tungsten fixture to achieve the same luminosity. So all of that is increasing our options in the lighting department enormously. And then, of course, I'm nerdy about some stuff that's just cool. I do like the wraparound LED screens, which sounds like something that, oh, that's going to use a lot of energy. But what people don't necessarily understand is when you have a wraparound green screen, you have to light that thing evenly from top to bottom, which usually involves like dozens of lights along the top and dozens of lights along the bottom, just that have no purpose other than to just light this green screen behind everything, and then you need more lights, etc. So it seems to me that a big LED screen may actually be more efficient, but I haven't done that math, but I probably will at some point. And I'm excited about just the robot motion capture things. And robotic motion capture is cool because you can just replicate identically the same shots and camera movements over and over again. And for me, anything that gets us home early is a good thing. So if you're not kind of like, oh, the camera wobbled here, and oh, we didn't quite catch this, and I'm like, oh, there's so much time is spent doing like 95 takes of something where the issue is that the match for the previous shot isn't as perfect as it needs to be. But you can just get a robot to do all of that. Like I'm sorry, camera operators, but you can also learn how to operate the robot.
Exactly.
Still just one job, right?
Oh, Kerri, this is great. Thank you so much for your time today and your innovation and dedication to sustainability and making this happen. This is great.
Oh, no worries.
It's been a pleasure.
A fun chat. I wish you great things with this podcast, and I can't wait to hear it.
I know. We're excited. Thank you so much, Kerri.
No worries.
Hey, listeners. If you have a story about innovation and sustainability in entertainment, please get in touch with us at tieinpodcast@gmail.com. That's TIEIN podcast, all one word, @gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. We may ask you to be a guest on the show. Our designer is Aaliyah Kane. Music is by Peter Chapman. Our producer is Colin Miller.